Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I want to do something a little bit different. Now, on my channel, my kind of uploading and content creation philosophy is that I really like to experiment with all of my videos and my channel at basically a constant rate. That's why I've changed my style over the years. That's why I've toyed around with different topics, series, and so on. And today, well, I got a different camera angle for one. We'll see how that turns out. And not just that, but I decided to really test myself because a lot of what I do in my life is also about self-training and self-improvement. So one of the ways I'm going to really test myself hard here in this video is that I have challenged myself to create a video entirely off the top of my head, which is that in this case, I don't even know what the topic's going to be. You guys do, because you've already seen the title and thumbnail, but I don't quite just yet. And when it comes to it, well, of course I'm going to do a Dragon Ball topic, because we know it gets the views on Laughingstock Media. But with that being said, there's a lot to talk about with the Dragon Ball franchise. So often I get people saying that they think I'm running out of ideas. The problem with me is I come up with ideas at a constant rate, which I guess I'll prove right now in this video by coming up with yet another idea for this channel. And, when it comes to different placements in arcs, let's say, in the Dragon Ball franchise, we do have the separation between the initial Dragon Ball, we have Dragon Ball Z, and then in chronological order, we got GT, we got some specials like Yosun Goku, and then the even more non-canon specials, I guess you could say, by Naho Oishi with the creation of that one, and then with the author whose name escapes me with the episode of Bardock and the animated adaptation. It's really interesting when you take a look at all these, and a lot of people have different favorites of theirs. For me, my favorite arc has always been the Cell Saga of Dragon Ball Z, which I've talked in depth about in the past. And, the thing is, with regard to the Cell Saga, for me, the reason why it's so great is because it separates a lot of the different aspects that came before and afterward. In a sense, it really was the perfect ending. And I do plan to do a video, which won't be off the top of my head. Well, I'll have essentially bullet points of the manga in front of me and then do it off the top of my head like I usually do with my videos, but about the different things that happened at the end, not only in terms of the Cell Saga for me being the perfect ending for the arc, which came after, well, the perfect villain, but not just that. Let me adjust my light a little bit here so I don't look like I'm sitting in the dark, all on my own talking to myself, and I just so happen to have a recording here. But not just that, with regard to Goku and the decision, the Buu Saga, to bring him back. But one of the biggest reasons I love the Cell Saga has to do with the concepts as well, particularly with regard to future Trunks, his entire timeline, and time travel. I've always loved time travel in these different particular storylines. So for example, the Terminator, which is one of the massive inspirations for the Cell Saga, and it's kind of time travel in a sense, which I discussed in a video you guys can see in the top right corner, which is actually over here because for some reason it decided to be that way in the recording. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that with time travel, I have actually always had a kind of theory about Dragon Ball's time travel that I've wondered if, in fact, could actually be something that not only bridges the connectors between all the different, let's say, spin-offs and timelines and things that exist within the multiverse or the Xenoverse, but not just that, but also in terms of how the timelines work post time travel. And wow, I guess I'm just giving myself a really difficult thing to do off the top of my head here. A time travel theory. I mean, come on, Mike, are you crazy? People put a lot of effort into those time travel videos and you're just going to do one off the top of your head. But you know what? It's Laughingstock Media. How's it going? And we're going to do that right now because I want to talk about, I guess, while I'm here, my time travel theory, which I call the Imperfect time travel theory, which might be the title of this video. Unless it won't get clicks, I'll have to ask Quaman about that because he always loves to tell me to change my titles. Hey, shout out Quaman. And also, let's shout out Blackenfist. I know you're not watching this, but hello, beautiful friends from all around the world. I will be your impression, Blackenfist. I definitely owe a lot to him and Kwame in terms of helping me get my name out there early on. But in terms of the time travel theory, let's get into that in depth right here and right now. Because with this theory, it's something very different from anything I've actually heard before in this fandom. Because as we know, in the Dragon Ball story, or as maybe you don't know, so I'll just explain again, probably for the 10 millionth time on this channel, when you travel back in time from one timeline, you create another timeline, barring the on-off method of time travel, which you guys could see far more explained in Primer, a great independent film by Shane Carruth, which I think is still on Netflix. Definitely recommend that because it's a great time travel story. Same thing with the series Dark on Netflix. That show is amazing. And do not watch it dubbed. Watch it in the original German. But nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that in Dragon Ball, you go back in time and create another timeline. However, at that point, there will also be the option to visit that timeline, barring that you do not go back before that timeline. So for instance, the initial time travel in that timeline is what I mean to say. So for instance, the original Trunks goes back in time and creates a new timeline known as the unseen timeline. Then at that point, what happens is that Trunks continues to visit there, helping to save them, and things play out similar to how they would have in the main timeline, with the exception of Cell being there, aside from being in his incubation, which I talked about in another video about villains that may still be alive in other timelines, which you could check out there, including the unseen Cell. Now, the original Cell killed the original Trunks, stole his time machine, and went back to 1 year before future Trunks did, which caused the creation of the main timeline because of everything that we see playing out in the main timeline with the original Cell there. And it also simultaneously helped to create the future Trunks timeline because Trunks, who was already present in the time stream, would have gone back again from another duplicate history of Trunks, which in turn caused him to learn about Cell, which changed his timeline, allowing him to, in part, kill not only the androids, but Cell, which would stop an infinite loop, because if, let's say, Cell killed our future Trunks that we see on screen, aside from that flashback where he kills the original one, which I guess we should just stop calling future Trunks and just call Trunks because every other one is not him. The fact of the matter is that Cell killed him, and if he had killed this Trunks, it would have caused an infinite loop because he would have gone back again, probably to a time before the other Trunks did, which would create yet another timeline and kind of go ad infinitum or infinitum during that point in time. And the thing is, though, I mean, maybe you can make an argument he actually would have gone back to the exact same time that the other Cell did, meaning that there would actually be two Cells in the future or in the main timeline, or maybe another Cell would just pop up and then be ready to fight and throw hands, even though they're in, he probably wouldn't be able to absorb the androids this time. And even if he did, well, Gohan is there to put him in his place. But nonetheless, the fact of the matter is, with that, we always see the rippling time effects moving forward in the story. So, for instance, in the main timeline, we saw that there were a lot of changes from what Trunks encountered in his History of Trunks timeline. For example, we saw that with Trunks, when he was in the main timeline, he had no knowledge of androids 19 and 20, which maybe happened in the unseen timeline as well, but nonetheless, there was no knowledge of them, and they had shown up. Then, the main timeline androids were seemingly even more powerful than Trunks's, which I also discussed in another video you guys can see in the top right corner about whether or not that was actually the case. Wow, I'm really throwing those out, even though it's completely off the top of my head. Now, even beyond that, we also had Cell, of course, appearing in that timeline. We had Android 16 being alive in that timeline, not dismantled, destroyed, or whatever happened to him in the other ones, which I discussed in another video in the top right corner. With that being said, we only really ever see time travel ripples happening forward in time. But with this theory, what if perhaps this does not just go in one direction? What if instead the time travel actually also went backward? So for instance, in the DC movie and also the comics, we see the story of the Flash in Flashpoint. So in that, we learn from Dr. Zoom, who is actually the Reverse Flash, that whenever the Flash goes back in time, there is something called a time boom. Essentially, what happens is much like a sonic boom or some sort of rippling event that happens in our normal main reality. What occurs is that when you travel back in time, the effects don't only go forward, but sometimes they also go backward. And so in effect, what would happen, the Dragon Ball variation, is that maybe when future Trunks goes back in time, it doesn't just make a version of the timeline that's exactly the same up until that point, but rather a timeline that changed even in the past and the future simultaneously, which means that when we have the main timeline storyline, and we have to wonder, is the main timeline and its story the exact same leading up to the events of when Trunks emerged, or perhaps is it something that is quite different? Maybe, for instance, what we see in like the movie continuities and the different movies that play out in there, for all we know, what happens is when Trunks goes back in time, he actually alters the history of the timelines that he creates. They create an imperfect duplicate or copy of the timelines overall. So, for instance, in the movie timeline, we see things like Tree of Might happening, which could never happen in the main continuity. Same thing with Lord Slug, because Goku should be on Namek at that point. He even references Frieza. Even Cooler's revenge seems to be, Cooler is under the impression that Goku killed his brother, but Goku's on Earth and he can't just normally turn into a Super Saiyan. And the list goes on of different changes that are very different from the main timeline. So what if those actually take place in another continuity that Trunks himself created in universe? Like, for example, the unseen timeline. Perhaps there's so many different changes that happen because, again, time travel. It isn't merely a matter of, him just changing things in the future that come afterward because of his presence or Cell's presence at that point in the timeline, but rather their very presence and creation of this automatically would in turn create totally different paths for that timeline simultaneously, if you see what I mean. If you're following what I'm doing, because the fact that I'm not really showing visual aids on the screen at this point in time. So I know that a lot of you just listen, so shout out to all of you, especially the ones who are watching. You get to look at me for an entire video. Look at me. Another shout out to Quaman right there. But the fact of the matter is that nonetheless, what I am trying to discuss here with regard to this imperfect timeline theory is that maybe the reason why so many changes happened in the main timeline isn't just because they initiate and ripple from the initial point. Because you have to think about it too. Some of the things with Dr. Gero and what he was doing, could they have really all changed based upon something that happened within 3-4 years of them fighting him? I mean, after all, we have the androids, 17 and 18, for instance, who are seemingly stronger in the main timeline than they are in the future. But why is that the case? Additionally, in the anime continuity, which again, whole different can of worms there, we even see different versions and variation of the history of Trunks and things playing out. Not to mention the anime continuity is also different from the manga continuity, and in the anime special, it's also different in terms of the Trunks' story, where Trunks becomes a Super Saiyan after Gohan's death, versus in the Trunks the story version in the manga, he already is a Super Saiyan. So it's like, why would those things change in the different continuities other than adaptation, unless maybe it all has to do with time travel? Maybe one version of the story, we're seeing a different future Trunks. Then there's a lot of people who also are under the impression that perhaps the future Trunks who shows up 3 years later might actually be a different Trunks entirely. Like maybe the original Trunks is the one that showed up and then he died, and then he was replaced with a different Trunks who was already en route in the story. Now that's a whole different can of worms I'll probably discuss in its own video, but again, there are a lot of things out of the traditional canon that could be explained by this imperfect timeline theory, like, for instance, again, the movies, the specials, why the canons are different, why there are like at least 3 different versions of the Battle of Gods continuity with the manga, with the original movie, with the anime, and the same thing with Resurrection F, the same thing with, the Path to Power movie, for instance, the special. Does that take place in, maybe the unseen timeline or another timeline that's created? And it's not just that, too. It's not even just Trunks who is doing this, because then in the Dragon Ball Super manga, Zamasu tells this whole story about how he got a time traveling device, like a time machine, from the character in Universe 12 that we never hear about again, who also is a time traveler, and we don't even know, did he time travel before Trunks? Does that mean that even in the original story that we're watching, the original future Trunks and the original Cell are not even the original ones, and there's an entirely different multiverse and timeline out there that we've never explored with totally different changes and continuities? Did things change in the past from that storyline? And did things have rippling changes in the past? Like, for example, what if in one timeline or one continuity, Goku never even left planet Vegeta because of a time ripple that changed. And so in the main timeline, the original version, the story that we see it as currently, that is the reason why Goku went, and everything went into effect. And so the universe time traveler actually changed things in the past and present. I mean, especially if he'd gone back even before everything. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we don't really know what the true full effects of time travel are in Dragon Ball beyond, what we just see on screen. So there are a lot of people who will probably say there isn't enough evidence to support this idea. The movies and other things are different continuities that shouldn't be counted at all in Trunks' time travel. And the same thing for the video games like Xenoverse and different ones that delve into even further timelines and create even further timelines. And many people disregard them altogether because they will focus primarily on the manga continuity, where it seems like in the future Trunks storyline, there are only about 4 overall timelines, and then come Dragon Ball Super, there end up being about 7. I'll be doing another video in depth that has to do with that, but I thought it'd be fun to discuss this theory in a video for once, because the fact of the matter is, for all we know, it is something that will be brought up in the future, that the time travel actually has even greater rippling effects than simply creating another timeline. And, I say simply, but in the Dragon Ball Super continuity, they tell us that when you make a new timeline, you're actually making an entire new multiverse of 12 universes. And again, what if in one of these timelines, Zeno, through a rippling effect, is the one who erased 6 of those universes, and another timeline he never did that. And then you can get an invasion storyline from not the NWO and WCW in the 1990s, but rather an invasion storyline not of NXT and the WWE, but again, to stop getting off track, an invasion of the enemies that come from another timeline where those universes existed to get revenge upon Zeno, or something like that. I mean, there's a Zeno in every universe, so that means that there's several other Zenos who could team up and then maybe merge together into the ultimate Zeno that Harold would still hate and want to beat him up. And he definitely could do that because, the Gaons. With that being said, guys, what do you think about this? Do you think that there is much evidence in universe and even out of universe to suggest that perhaps time travel created imperfect timelines, and that instead of it all just kind of focusing and correlating existing within one continuity in reality, instead it actually caused rippling effects that we see in all the variations of Dragon Ball in the timelines, in Dragon Ball GT, in Dragon Ball Super, in who knows with Dragon Ball Magic, and the video games, and so on and so forth. Let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments. Also, thank you guys for watching. I do appreciate it. And, make sure to subscribe if you're new here. Enable all notifications. That way you can stay up to date with all my future videos and that much more. I got posts, I got polls, I got plenty of things coming. Also, Additionally, make sure to leave a like, share this video out, and I'm glad you guys were here watching the whole time, especially those of you who stuck around this whole time. You guys are awesome. I know this is a very different video from what I usually do, all off the top of my head, in a way to where I just, was like, well, let's just talk about a complex time travel theory without any kind of forethought into it, aside from, well, the theory that I crafted inside of my head over the course of time. And every time I go back to the manga, every time I go back to, the anime, I always think of something new. I always kind of look at things from a different perspective. And that really shows how great they truly are. Because at the end of the day, when you can keep going back to something and you learn something new, or you find something new, or something new to appreciate, that separates it so much more from the other stories where it's the same thing over again, or they really lose their rewatch and rereadability factor. But Dragon Ball still going strong. And I'll talk about in depth another video in the future if Dragon Ball still holds up, and analyzing far more in depth. I'm really looking forward to you guys seeing that. But thank you all for watching one more time, and make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. And I challenge anyone on YouTube to do the same thing I just did in this video, making it all off the top of your head. See you later.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.